Fundraising dinners. Both major parties host them, but let's not pretend that makes it okay. And let's not mistake it for anything other than what it is. Cash for access. This week, both Labor and the opposition hosted budget dinners, and I mean budget as in the federal budget, not budget as in these were cheap dinners, because no, these were not cheap dinners. It would have cost you $5,000 for a ticket to the Labor Party's post-budget dinner if you wanted some FaceTime with the PM and friends, while the Liberal Party charged up to $2,000 for their shindig. I guess you get what you pay for, and time with the government is probably worth a touch more than time with an out-of-touch opposition. The crossbench have been raising the red flag on lobbying for a while now. Why is it always the crossbench calling attention to stuff like this and not the major parties? Don't answer that, it was rhetorical. Anyway, here's Independent Senator David Pocock.
You can't tell me that you can hand on heart look at Australians and say that there is enough transparency when you have 2,000 people accessing this building and nobody knows who they are. This is not acceptable, that there is so little transparency, that there are 2,000 people who Australians have no idea who they are or what they're doing in Parliament House. You would assume that our lobbying code of conduct is better than the US, but it's not. We have such a long way to go here. We have an incredible democracy, and yet we have major parties who are comfortable with a system that works for them. They're comfortable with a system that produces this revolving door of staffers and politicians picking up plum jobs in the private sector, working as lobbyists, working as government relations people. And this needs to change. There's an expectation from Australians that we work for them, because we do. The only power we have here in the Senate is through the people in our states and territories who elected us. How can we say to them that they do not deserve to know who we're signing into this building, who we're giving access all areas 24-hour passes to? It's indefensible, and it's no wonder that we just hear silence from the major parties. The vested interests, the revolving door of staff and politicians going into all of these industries that surprisingly don't seem to be taxed that much and always seem to find a way to squirm out of tax reform.
If you want to clean up politics and limit the influence of vested interests and take a step towards improved political transparency, then this is a good place to start. Independent MP for Kooyong, Dr Monique Ryan, has been working to have her lobbying bill, also known as the Improving Government Honesty and Trust Bill, passed, which has seen a lot of support from the crossbench, but not surprisingly, not so much support from the major parties, at least not so far. It's going to be interesting to see whether or not it ends up getting the widest support it needs or not. If it's not passed, I think we'll all have a very clear answer as to whether or not the two major parties are held hostage by vested interests or not. You might be across the recent shambles unleashed on the country thanks to the government's bullshit future gas strategy released by the Resources Minister. To be blunt, the strategy looked like it had been written by the fossil fuel industry as opposed to a government that was looking to take serious action on climate change. Which is why I think the question that Monique Ryan put to the PM in question time was a more than valid one.
Call to the honourable member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, I understand that last night you attended a $5,000 per head post-budget dinner, which was hosted by the Federal Labor Business Forum. For the benefit of the House, were any fossil fuel industry lobbyists or other fossil fuel industry representatives in attendance?
Just before the Prime Minister answers that question, I do have some difficulty with the phrasing of that question in result that it does potentially relate to party affairs that the Prime Minister can't be asked about. So I'm just going to ask the member for Kooyong to rephrase her question to ensure that it's within standing orders.
Thank you, Speaker. Okay. My question is for the Prime Minister. I understand that you attended a $5,000 a head post-budget dinner last night. Can you tell the House whether any fossil fuel industry lobbyists or other fossil fuel industry representatives were in attendance?
That question is barely within the standing orders. I'll allow the Prime Minister to answer the question, but he'll obviously be able to answer only parts of the question that are relevant to the standing orders.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I've stood and had the great honour of being the Australian Labor Party candidate in 10 elections. During those 10 elections as a candidate for Greenlaw, I have spent less money on those 10 campaigns than the member for Kooyong did in her one.
Order. Give a call. Order. No. Order. The member for Hasluck will resume her seat. Order. When the House comes to order, the member for Kooyong, just as any other member, is entitled to raise a point of order. The Prime Minister has concluded his answer, so it obviously can't be on the point of order on relevance, but I'll hear from the member for Kooyong.
Well, my issue, Mr Speaker, is that the Prime Minister has not in any way addressed the substance of my question.
Resume your seat. Order. Order. There was no point. Order. There was no point of order, and it's getting close to abuse of the standing orders, of abusing standing orders in that way.
Now, that was an awkward question for Anthony to answer, no doubt, and maybe it caught him off guard, but his inability to even attempt to answer the question was illuminating. I mean, let's be real, that was a fairly ordinary non-answer. Quick sidebar, it was also a really weird flex. It's a bit rich of Albo to crow about his electoral successes and the small amount of money he's had to spend on holding his seat, given the simple fact that he's never had to work all that hard. Here's a cold hard reality check. Albo was gifted one of the safest Labor seats in the country. A seat which, on a two-party preferred basis, Labor has pulled roughly 70% of the vote since its inception. An inanimate carbon rod could run in that electorate, and as long as it carried the Labor branding, would likely walk away with a win. It's a vastly different experience than, say, an independent unseating a sitting Liberal federal treasurer in what had traditionally been one of the safest Liberal seats in the country. Anyway, I find it really interesting how many former federal resource ministers end up finding careers in the fossil fuel sector post-politics. I mean, they may not have lobbyists in their job titles, but I think we can all use our imaginations. Here's Gary Gray, former Minister for Resources and Energy in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government. Gary had been a senior executive at Woodside Petroleum prior to entering Parliament. When he left politics, he took up a position as General Manager of External Affairs at Mineral Resources, a mining company. Here's Martin Ferguson, the other former Resource Minister in the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd government, who created quite a stir by taking up a lobbying gig with the Australian Energy Producers Association 6 months after vacating his ministerial role. Around the same time, he also took up a job as head of natural resources for Seven Group Holdings. Here's Ian Macfarlane, former Resource Minister in the Howard government and Minister for Industry and Science in the Abbott-Turnbull governments. Macfarlane took up the position of Chief Executive of the Queensland Resources Council less than 6 months after leaving politics. Look, I think it's fairly safe to say I won't be taking any bets on where any of the more recent resource ministers will end up when they eventually call time on their political careers.
The revolving door of staff and politicians going into all of these industries that surprisingly don't seem to be taxed that much.
Whether it's the cash for access, press the flesh dinners, or the post-politics gravy train, it's pretty clear that when it comes to lobbying, there's a bit of a symbiotic relationship going on, and it really needs to stop. Private companies are not handing over as much cash as they are out of charity. They are forking out millions of dollars on lobbying for the simple reason that it works. Paying for influence isn't new, but that doesn't mean we need to accept it. It's going to be worth keeping a close eye on what happens with the Improving Government Honesty and Trust Bill, because surely no party that is serious about cleaning up politics or serious about improving transparency could possibly vote against this one, could they? Could they?